Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Savvy Entrepreneur Show. I'm your host, Doris Nagel. I'm a crazy entrepreneur myself, and I love helping other entrepreneurs. I've counseled lots of startups and small businesses as part of my law and consulting practice, and I've helped or started to help at least 9 different startups. Oh, I wish I could tell you they were all wildly successful, but I have made a lot of mistakes and I have seen a lot of mistakes. So, one of the goals of the show is to share helpful information and resources and maybe help some of you out there not make some of those same mistakes. The second goal of the show is to inspire. I found, at least for me, that being an entrepreneur was often lonely, confusing, discouraging. Sometimes you have no idea whether you're on the right track or not, or where to turn for good advice. So, to help with both those goals, I have guests on the show every week who share their stories and their advice. And my guest this week is Trina Ntmere, the founder of a company called Lavender Eucalyptus. Trina, welcome to the Savvy Entrepreneur Show. Thank you so much for being with me this week.
Thanks for having me, Doris. It's a pleasure.
It is a pleasure to have you. I feel calm and bliss, just thinking about the name of your company. Talk about what your company does. What services does it provide and who does it help?
Lavender Eucalyptus, LLC, helps nonprofit organizations build capacity at the program level by working with program teams to gain a deeper understanding of their clients from their client's perspective. We do this by building out the client journey, or in other words, the path the client takes through their programs and services from the beginning to the end. We then look at the systems that are in place along that client path and use the insights we've gathered to optimize and improve or create when needed processes to help the team and clients achieve their program goals. We also work with the teams to revise and co-create outcomes and key results around that client journey.
For people who don't know the world of nonprofits, what is the big issue that you're trying to get at? And talk about maybe some of the more specific kinds of things you might help a nonprofit with.
So to boil it down, you can place our services in 3 main categories. The first is the path, the second is the systems, and the third is the results. What I described earlier is not new to nonprofits. In fact, many nonprofits, specifically the development teams, do this all the time. But what they're doing it with and for are funders and volunteers. Rarely is it done at the program level. And even more rare is the fact that it's done with the client in mind. So the focus is the client, and that's where we're different. And so the services, as I mentioned, the 3 main buckets, the path, the systems, and the results, it is basically helping teams better understand the path their clients take and what they go through from the initial touch point on through to the very end. And then looking at ways that they can serve them better by improving the systems and the processes that the clients interact with. And then also taking a look to see whether or not they're doing what they said they wanted to do, and seeing what they did.
Well, you said something that I want to probe a little further. You said that nonprofits hardly ever do this at the program level. What does that mean, and why don't they?
Based on my experience, because I've also been within this space, I have worked within nonprofits, I have worked with nonprofits, so I understand this at a personal level as well. What's happening at the program level is it always feels like a forest fire. It always feels like there's an emergency. Everyone is strapped. There are many constraints around resources, definitely constraints around time. a growing list, a never ending list of things that have to get done.
Yeah.
And the weight of the guilt that team members feel, the individuals that are serving feel, because there's so much more that they want to do.
Yeah.
And because of all of that, team members and the program teams rarely have opportunities to step back and really be strategic and look across the landscape and see where they can make what they're doing better and more efficient.
It's interesting. As a volunteer for several different nonprofits over the years, it's interesting that we're having this conversation because my sister, who also has done a lot of volunteer work, and I were kind of discussing, we were sort of kvetching a little bit, I guess, because we both realized that we were pretty disappointed in our experiences in working with as volunteers, and helping drive strategic direction for the different nonprofits we worked for. And what it's interesting, you say that they seldom have time to step back. I don't. It's interesting, maybe, but I guess my experience, and this certainly is my sister's, and I don't know how representative this is, but I would say there's a problem even at the sort of the strategic level, because even if you as a volunteer suggest something that would clearly improve the program efficiency or how it resonates with donors, a lot of times the management team just doesn't listen. It's like they're on some sort of a mission, and they have this vision, and they're convinced that their vision is right, and they don't want to hear anything else. Have you experienced any of that?
Oh, yes. And it sort of also goes back to what I was saying about the constraints on resources and time, and being able to produce results that will, like, immediate results that will help satisfy the obligations that they have to funders, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a matter of being able to, it could be figuring out a system or a way to incorporate that feedback and to act on it, and involving individuals from different departments, right? So that they can co-create and think about, how to act upon it, whether to act upon it, and when they should act upon it.
Well, it's interesting that a lot of these nonprofits, I think, are either started or a lot of them are started or headed up by people who are very passionate about a particular cause. And that's wonderful. I mean, you need people with that kind of passion, but it's oftentimes hard to get them to be practical. So I'll just give you one example. I was working with a community theater group, and it was clear the main focus of the group was to put on plays. People like getting in front of the audience and acting in front of people. Where they were really weak, though, was getting butts in the seat, marketing, selling tickets, and trying to get that group. They just kept wringing their hands and saying, well, nobody's coming. One time, one of their performances, there were, 20 people in the audience, which pretty tiny considering the venue they're in, but they seem incapable of literally looking at it like a business to sell and market tickets. That's just one example.
Yes. And so I understand what you're saying, and that's something that plagues nonprofits, but it also plagues for-profits and small businesses as well, and even larger businesses, right? We have these huge technology companies that are facing the same thing, whereby you do what's working and you do what you know, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Or your blind spots. And going back to your example of the small theater nonprofit, I'm guessing that they hired people who were just like them, right? And
well,
so
they didn't hire anybody. It's all volunteers.
It's all volunteers.
A lot of nonprofits actually are pretty much all volunteers. There's a surprising number. I mean, people may think of, nonprofit as like, the American Heart Association or the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation or the Ronald McDonald House or something. But actually, I would guess a lot of nonprofits are maybe there's one employee and the rest is a lot of volunteers. And it is like herding cats, I'm telling you.
You are absolutely right. And the reason for that goes back to what you said before. They were passionate about whatever they built the nonprofit around. And sometimes there are not funding sources for that, but there's still a need, and passionate individuals still feel compelled and a mission to do that.
Yeah.
Right? And then bringing on board other individuals who are just as passionate and can provide resources, be it time, capital, and whatever their skills are. Yeah. And so because of that, yes, it's hard to take a step back and be strategic, because now what they're dealing with is momentum, right? Just trying to continue to execute and be able to deliver the services. And so that's when, one, it makes it a bit more difficult if there aren't outside funders who recognize that, or volunteers who recognize that and say, let's just carve out some time. If we need to do it quarterly, if we need to do it in 6 months, if we need to do it right before we create the budget for the next year, we need to carve out time where we can really think about what kind of outcomes we want to produce, and what kind of key results and key activities will get us there. And so a lot of nonprofits do not have that, but there are a growing number of nonprofits that do, and a growing number of nonprofits that are part of collaborations that are finding the resources or seeing the need that they have to be more strategic. And there's also somewhat a push and pressure coming from funders who recognize that as well.
You said something that I hadn't really connected the dots. You said that nonprofits and for-profits often have the problem, and I think you're right. I think it comes down to, as you said, with some of the nonprofits, we human beings are funny, aren't we? We like people who validate us. We like people who are passionate about the same things we are. Corporations, I think, I have gotten in big trouble for basically being echo chambers for a certain way of looking at the world, which is not particularly diverse, not particularly inclusive. And it's interesting what you've said, I think rings pretty true as I kind of think back on my experiences, which is that, frankly, you think of nonprofits as the organizations doing for good. So you think maybe they get a pass, right? Because their heart's in the right place. They're trying to do socially good things. And yet, as you've alluded to, if you don't have a truly diverse and inclusive perspective on your team that's making strategic decisions and that is running the programs and hopefully reflecting back to donors and volunteers to stay in line, you end up with an organization that's kind of lopsided. maybe they look diverse, but they may all kind of have a similar set of skills. And in one way or another, they're not very diverse. And as a result, it's hard for them to adapt and change, even as nonprofits. Do you think that's fair?
That is so fair. And to even build that out further, we see this in any type of organizational structure. The team that starts.
Black people who are like us. I mean, that's human nature.
That is human nature. And typically, often, the team that starts the nonprofit or the business is not the team to help it to grow.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we think about it that way, it's a natural progression through the life cycle for nonprofits.
Yeah. One of the other things my sister and I were talking about is what nonprofits need to do to continue to stay nimble. So my sister was talking about a benefit she went to for the American Heart Association in her city. And she basically said everybody there was like over 50. And I was noting the same thing. I went to a Chicago Symphony Orchestra concert. There was like nobody there under 50. So you have to kind of wonder for some of these organizations, yeah, it worked in the past, but who's the next generation of donors for these organizations,
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that goes back to what you were saying. It goes back to the sources of funding. And for the crowd that's over 50, it is because they can leverage their network in order to bring in more dollars for the nonprofit.
Right. That's absolutely right.
Right. So what I feel would help nonprofits be more nimble is to have patient capital and carve outs within that capital, that funding that allows them to really take their time to think through all of what we're talking about, the strategy, to really flesh that out and then move forward with executing.
I guess what you're saying is donors who are willing to invest in the strategic direction of a nonprofit. That's what you mean by that?
That is what I mean by that. And we see it in the for-profit counterparts, right? With the startup ecosystem, but not as much with the smaller grassroots nonprofit in some places across the nation, in some geographies.
I don't know if I see much patient capital anywhere, unfortunately. But it certainly would be good to have if you can get it. That's for sure.
It is for sure. Yep.
And the other thing that's interesting is the core capabilities of the management team. Okay, so I'll take my community theater group again. They might have a donor who says, now take your time and get the strategy right. But I think it comes down to the fact that the team of people, the core team of people that run that nonprofit wants to act and put on plays in front of people, and they don't really have much interest in selling tickets or subscriptions or finding long-term sponsors. So you can have capital that's very patient, but in that case, and it's the case in a bunch of other nonprofits that I know about, you can have capital that's as patient as you want it to be, but if you don't have the right team, you're just going to get more of the same, only it'll take longer.
Yes. And so that is, like you said, that will be the case. Because as long as people are passionate about some type of issue impacting individuals or communities, they're going to be building nonprofits, right, at scale. There are a lot of nonprofits that are started each and every year, the same way there are a lot of businesses that are started each and every year.
I did not realize that.
Yes. And so part of it, too, is being able to, and I mentioned this a little earlier, it's also, like you said, the nudging from funders and baking metrics and expectations around the receipt of the funds.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm curious from your perspective in working with nonprofits, at what point do organizations reach the strategic donor phase? Because a lot of nonprofits will do things like, hey, we're putting on this play, we do 4 plays a year, and we give out scholarships for 2 students a year. And hey, wouldn't you like to contribute something and put an ad in our program? Now, I would call that not very strategic. That's kind of, hey, this is what we're doing. And, wouldn't you like to throw a little money our way for a little publicity? But it's hard for those kind of donors to really, they don't expect to have much of an impact. They're just kind of throwing a little chump change the way of the organization, right? But at some point, an organization maybe gets a donor that's bigger than that can actually make an impact. At what point do nonprofits hit that? And how do they get there?
Typically we see that at larger nonprofits, over 1 million or so, that have had some traction. However, I want to say that this can happen during the first few years of a nonprofit's existence. What's going on, right? Being able to align with strategic funders is all about being crystal clear on how the nonprofit is creating change and aligning that to the goals and mission of the funders. So once they can share very vividly that story and how they contribute to creating that change, then they can open themselves up to strategic funders, as well as strategic partnerships with larger organizations that have been doing this. And to go back to your example of the dance studio, let's say that some of their students come from neighborhoods within urban areas where having them be involved in the program is exposing them to so much more, like social capital. There's an education component, and being able to show how their participation is actually changing what could be those students' narrative, their life narratives, is very powerful. And you don't have to be a big organization in order to do that, but you have to understand what you're doing as the organization, how you're doing it, and then be able to, the numbers have to show that as well. So being able to collect the data, analyze it, and just continue to be strategic around that.
You've started me thinking about some of the analogies of how nonprofits are like for-profits and how they're different. It's almost like some nonprofits are the equivalent of a lifestyle business. They don't have any real huge goals. So the community theater group isn't really very interested in building awareness in the schools of theater or interested in bringing theater to underserved communities in their area. They're just interested in putting on plays and are hoping somebody will throw a little money their way so they can keep doing that little thing. And I think that's true of a lot of nonprofits. They're essentially the nonprofit equivalent of a lifestyle business, right? They have no interest in scaling and don't really think about the world in terms of how to do that. The nonprofits you're talking about, which are probably way more interesting clients, are the ones who want to scale, who want to make impact at a larger scale. Do you think that's fair?
I think it's fair. And I also think even if the number of individuals served are small, it is being able to really think through the scale of the impact at the individual level as well. So not having to scale and have a large number of individuals that are being served, but being able to serve each individual extremely well. And I argue that is what becomes the scalable model. because there are a lot of organizations that have scale and are large and are also not efficient, are not creating the significant impact that everyone wants them to.
Right.
And again, that is why the services that Lavender Eucalyptus LLC offers brings it back to the individual.
So, Trina, I want to switch gears and talk a little more about how you got started with this business. How did you get the idea for this business? And what about your background led you to start this business?
Sure. So what gave me the idea for this, what set all of this in motion, was actually my work within nonprofits. And so for a majority of my career, except for when I left undergrad and went into banking, my career...
That's definitely not nonprofit.
That's not nonprofit.
No.
Definitely not.
No.
But it was a wonderful experience. And it opened my eyes to so much more. But it was not nonprofit, and it was not being able to, it did not give me the opportunity directly on a day-to-day basis to be in communities, making the kind of change that I wanted to make.
Yeah.
So
big organizations, particularly financial services, are not, it's much harder to make an impact, particularly with social issues. Yeah. So you went to work in the nonprofit world. Talk about your journey through that to starting your own business.
So I had done everything from providing direct services on the program team to administering programs to providing capital to local businesses and larger nonprofit institutions. And regardless of the setting, I and my team and team members grappled with the same thing that we were talking about earlier in our conversation, and that is constraints around resources, not having enough time, the endless list of things that need to get done on all levels of the organization and the operations, and just feeling the weight of it all, sometimes experiencing a little burnout or what have you, because as we talked about before, people are typically in nonprofits because they are passionate.
Mm-hmm.
And they're being fueled by that passion.
Right. And that does not necessarily make them good at strategic direction. It does not necessarily make them always great managers, with the ability to hire or motivate people or focus on the most important thing, despite other attractive, bright, shiny objects that might come along.
Right.
So how do you help that? How do you help those people?
Yeah. So that is the reason why I started Lavender Eucalyptus. So I was at an inflection point about 2 years ago, about to be 3 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time flies. Wow, that's amazing.
It does, but it also feels like it was just yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, which is the time flies. But I was at an inflection point and was thinking through the opportunity to start my business. I've always wanted to do it, but it finally came into shape in 2020. And so,
wow, in the middle of COVID, you decided to do this.
In the middle of COVID. And, there are a number of reasons for that.
Yes.
Brave, and also being presented with the opportunity to do so. Similar to a lot of individuals experiencing COVID, experiencing everything that was going on in 2020, my position, my role was phased out. And so
I didn't hear that.
thank you. But it's actually wonderful. I look at it as, things happen when they're supposed to happen,
Yeah.
right? And so
A window closes and another door opens,
and
right?
another door opens, and this was a huge door opening. And so I came into the new year saying that I was going to start um, my business, and I kept putting it off. I kept saying no. It's not gonna be the time. I'll probably try to do it at the end of the year.
Why do you think you put it off?
I put it off for one big reason, is that I am also a mom.
Yeah.
Yes, I am a single mom to an awesome little girl. And so it was that stability, and I use that loosely.
I was a single mom too, so I can
Really,
very, very hard. People do not
yes,
realize how darn difficult it is.
yes. And so that is a really big reason why I kept putting it off, even though there really is no stability. And as we saw
No,
in
there's not. There's
2020,
no stability. That's a convenient illusion that I tell people if that's what you want to inhale, you go ahead and you believe that. But but that's pretty much an illusion today. You are in charge of your own destiny as never before.
Yes, and that encapsulates what you just said perfectly, how I felt in that moment. And so when I tell you, for years, if you could see my file folder of all the starts and stops throughout my life of like, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now, and I put it off, that was not the case in June, July of 2020. And so I chose to inhale differently and bet big on myself. And there's no looking back.
Good for you. Good for you. So what kind of clients are your ideal clients? I think, we touched on in the first half of the hour some of the different kinds of nonprofits, and there's lots of kinds of nonprofits we didn't even talk about, but they're certainly not all created equal. And I'm sure some of them would be far more difficult clients to work with and to make the kind of impact you're hoping to make. So what do your ideal clients look like?
Yeah, so my ideal clients are teams that are comprised of some of the individuals that we were talking about earlier, right? That are passionate and dedicated and extremely committed to making change within the communities. To expand that out a bit further, that they're within organizations that are also dedicated to making those changes at the individual and community level, and are open to being strategic about it.
And have a budget, hopefully, to do that, because some of them may want to, but if they can't pay your bills, it's not very convenient for you.
It's not. Well, yes, it would be great if the services that I provide could be covered completely from the nonprofit's budget, but there are other ways, right? So on my end, I'm also building these relationships with funding institutions, like I mentioned earlier, who notice and place an importance on being able to help the organizations they are funding be better at what they're doing from an operational level.
How does that work? How do you involve them and give them a role?
Yeah, so sometimes and what's new is I'm also building this pathway with municipalities as well. And so what they have a lot of times, and growing number of them, are carve outs dedicated to additional supportive like services to support nonprofits in this area.
I did not know that. That's amazing. It's good, but amazing.
You and me both are excited about it because, there are a lot of nonprofits, and because it's so needed at the nonprofit level where they're working at the grassroots level and really in the community, a lot of them don't have the financial capacity in order to take on my services. So then I have to be creative and nimble because I truly believe in them and what they're doing. And I believe that I can help them make changes for the better.
So how do you find clients? Is it just through your network, word of mouth? Have you done some marketing?
It's a combination of all of that. Initially, when I started out, as with a lot of for-profits and small businesses, I started out taking on all kinds of projects, right, in order to bring in, revenue and income.
Trina, I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing at myself, really, because as a service provider, the number of clients that were not great fits for what I really wanted to do, when I look back, was truly astounding. Truly astounding. I wasted a lot of time really trying to just do stuff that people wanted me to do. And it wasn't very fulfilling. So I'm just laughing at myself mostly, not you.
Oh, no, I didn't take it as such. The thing is, so for my first full operating year, I took on all kinds of projects. And when I tell you that I felt like I was drowning, I felt like I was drowning. I felt like I was working full time for 5 different organizations.
Yeah. Right.
As opposed to one.
Right.
And
one or two where you could really make a difference as opposed to helping put out a brush fire here and there with different organizations.
Yes. No, and what I'm alluding to is the fact that, what I mentioned before, when we work for nonprofits, we're feeling like stretched in so many different directions. Well, that was my life times 5.
Right. You just become an extension of the fire that needs to be put out. So that's not very strategic.
Yes. And that is exactly. So that year was extremely informative because of that. I realized, and again, I'm bringing in, and occasionally I'm going to bring in my daughter, because I also wanted to be and create space where I can be extremely present with her and for her, as well as doing extremely wonderful work with the nonprofits and being present with them. I had to really think through this, right? And so again, inflection points. So that was 2021, right? First full operating year. Toward the end of the year, coming into 2022, I was like, I need to get a handle on this. I entered the new year exhausted. And I kept, again, putting it off. And like I said, I'm a big believer that, timing, opportunities, and I'm a believer in the universe, things happen for a reason, right? And so I enter into the new year, 2022, saying, I need to get a handle on all of this. I am like working like crazy for my clients on all of these very disparate projects.
Right. And not making the impact you were hoping to make.
And because of that, because they were all different, not being able to make the impact and not being able to scale that.
Absolutely not.
And so life happened.
That is the service provider's dilemma, I think, for almost every professional service provider that gets started. I believe the clients you say no to are as important as the ones you say yes to.
Exactly. And there are opportunity costs to everything.
Yep.
So I had to say no to some clients. I really, for the most part, I had great clients. There were a couple of opportunities that I encountered where I learned a lot from, being euphemistic.
I hear you.
Yes, but I had to also say no to some pretty phenomenal opportunities. And I learned from that as well.
Yeah. We're rapidly running up to the top of the hour. I really want you to share with folks maybe some words of advice. My first question is really, what kind of resources did you tap into, things that you found were particularly helpful for you personally as you've grown and really morphed your business a little bit?
As you mentioned, the things that you're sharing with your community and many listeners and entrepreneurs is creating that community, right? So starting out, it was a very lonely place. And there are moments of, loneliness that still pop up. And so early on, I sort of pieced together a virtual community through podcasts, through, YouTube. And then I also got involved with actual virtual, and I'm mentioning virtual communities because we were in, and we're still in, the pandemic, but now we can re-enter the world and have a physical presence. Yeah. But it was a lot of virtual communities as well.
Well, I was going to say, recommend, if you haven't checked out, either you or even just to listeners, Founding Moms. I had the organizer of Founding Moms, Jill Saltzman, on the show. And I wish that I had known about her group sooner, because it sounds like they have a lot of fun. And it's all women, a lot of single women who are starting service. And she said most of them are service businesses. So folks, you might want to check out my interview with Jill Saltzman or take a look at Founding Moms if that describes you. So you pieced together your online community. Were there other sources that you leaned on? Friends, your church, your family?
Yes, all of that.
Yeah.
So family was extremely helpful, especially earlier on in my business. There's one family member in particular, my father, who had a lot of faith in what I was doing, encouraged me.
That's wonderful.
Supported, yes. And my daughter, like I said.
How old is she, by the way?
She just turned 10.
It's amazing what a source of inspiration and support even kids that young can be, isn't it?
It is. It is. And then friends who were extremely encouraging, although because they also have full-time jobs, not really understanding the ins and outs day to day, but still being able to reach out and just relax, vent, share memories, laugh was also extremely helpful.
A laugh is definitely great therapy. What are your plans for growing the business? If you're successful, what do you think Lavender Eucalyptus will look like in, say, 3 years?
Yes. So 3 years will be here before we know it. Time does fly.
I know. Some people go, oh, that's too far away. I don't know. I'm like, okay. I don't know. Think about where you were 3 years ago. It seems like yesterday to me, but all right.
It does. To me too. And so 3 years from now, what I'm hoping to do is to have built a reputation as being the go-to expert within this space. So like centering the program and improving the operations around the client. I still, because I am in, Chicagoland, and there is no shortage of nonprofits.
No, there's lots.
There are so many. I don't plan to expand my geographic footprint just yet. For me, that's year 6 or 7. But in the meantime, I plan on really refining what I do my service delivery. Um,
Do you think you'll have employees?
you know, I, that's a very good question. Right now, um, I don't see that within the next 3 years. That doesn't mean that I don't leverage like external support,
Yeah.
right? And independent consultants and
Right.
contractors in order to help
Virtual
me get capacity.
assistants or things like that.
Yes,
Oh,
yes. But as far as having, bringing individuals on and having payroll that way, I don't see that within the next
yeah.
three years. Definitely not within the next 3 years. And a reason for that is because it will force me in order to really build solid systems.
Yes, it will. You're absolutely right. Well, before I let you go, what advice would you offer to people thinking about starting a new business, especially women and moms? What do you wish you'd known that somebody had told you before you started?
Yeah. What do I wish I had known? Um, and it's something that I'm still learning and still reminding myself of on a daily basis. And that is to just, give yourself grace, right? Especially moms, especially women and entrepreneurs.
What do you mean specifically by that?
Yes, we set the bar extremely high, always, right? In every aspect of our life. And we have to be, give 100% in every area. And that's just not going to happen. Even though we have children, we know that, we may have a plan and we may have to throw that out. We may have to improvise. The same with, your business, and then being in a position where you have to combine the two. It's to just give yourself grace. And doing that won't necessarily make the path smoother because, as I'm sure you are aware, that things are going to be thrown at you. It's going to test your endurance. At times I have thought whether or not I'm doing the right thing, right? Not because I don't love what I'm doing, but again, it goes back to that stability and having to care for, a little one.
I do
and being
know.
the sole provider. But also in those moments, I have to tell myself and remind myself, and it's helpful to do so, to say, it's not here yet. Like, yet is my favorite word, giving myself grace and knowing that, it's okay to have this image of success in my mind, but I don't have to achieve that today. And I forget who provided this, where I heard this saying from, but I've heard it over and over again. And now it's one of my favorites, is that we overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in a decade. And that goes back to grace. If I just continue to remind myself that this is a journey, right? Not a sprint, I will get there.
I love it. That is wonderful, wonderful advice. Well, last question for you before I let you go, Trina, and that is, if people are interested in chatting with you or learning more about Lavender Eucalyptus LLC and your services, or maybe just something you said today that makes them want to connect, what's the best way for them to learn more and get in contact?
Wonderful. Happy to share. The best way to get in contact, I'll give you three ways. The website, which is lavendereucalyptus.com, Instagram, and so it's /lavender.eucalyptus, or by email, contact@lavendereucalyptus.com.
Great. Trina, thanks so much for joining me today and talking about the world of nonprofits and your journey as well. as a single mom. It's a very tough, very tough. It's tough to be an entrepreneur. It's tougher yet being a woman entrepreneur. It's even tougher being a woman of color entrepreneur. And then you layer on being a single mom on top of that. And you are one brave lady. You have my admiration. I'll tell you that. So thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, a little bit of it today.
Thanks for having me, Doris. This was an absolutely fun conversation.
It was. Again, thanks so much to Trina for joining me, but also thanks to my listeners. I appreciate you. You're the reason I do this. Check out my new dedicated YouTube channel where I've posted lots of static videos of past episodes of the show called the Savvy Entrepreneur Radio Show. Download episodes, like them, comment on them, subscribe to make sure you get notified of next episodes as they're posted. My door is always open for comments, questions, and suggestions, or just to shoot the breeze. You can email me anytime at bnagel, Nagel, at thesavvyentrepreneur.org. I promise you'll always get a response back from me. Be sure to join me again next Saturday. But until then, I'm Doris Nagel, wishing you happy entrepreneuring.